Elderly couple loses retirement savings to scam. Their comeback story inspires millions. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. In a quaint Midwestern town, a retired couple's dream of a peaceful golden age shatters when they fall victim to a sophisticated investment scam. But as they team up with fellow retirees to expose the fraudster, they discover that their greatest adventure and most inspiring triumph may just be beginning. On a crisp autumn morning in the small town of Millbrook, Indiana, 73-year-old Robert Henderson stood at his living room window, clutching a piece of paper that felt as heavy as lead in his trembling hands. The golden leaves swirling in the breeze outside seemed to mock the turmoil brewing within him. He turned to face his wife of 50 years, Martha, her usually warm brown eyes now clouded with concern. "It's gone, Martha," Robert whispered, his voice cracking. "Everything we've saved. It's all gone." Martha's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "But how, Robert? We were so careful." The Hendersons had always prided themselves on their financial prudence. Robert, a retired high school physics teacher, and Martha, who had run a successful local bakery, had scrimped and saved for decades. Their nest egg was meant to fund peaceful golden years filled with visits to their grandchildren and perhaps a long-dreamed-of trip to Europe. But now, as Robert explained in halting words, their life savings had vanished into thin air. A smooth-talking investment advisor named James Barkley had convinced them to invest in what he promised was a sure thing, a revolutionary new tech startup that was supposedly going to change the world. "He showed us all these fancy charts and projections," Robert said, sinking into his favorite armchair. "Said we'd double our money in 6 months. It seemed too good to be true, but he had all the right credentials, Martha. How could we have known?" Martha sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "We couldn't have, dear. We trusted him, just like so many others did." As the reality of their situation sank in, the Hendersons realized they weren't alone. News had spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The Johnsons down the street, the Wilsons from their church group, even old Mrs. Abernathy, who lived alone in the big house on Elm, all had fallen victim to Barkley's scheme. The following days were a blur of panic and despair. Robert and Martha's children, living in different states with families of their own, were shocked and worried. They offered what help they could, but with mortgages and college funds to consider, there was only so much they could do. The Hendersons found themselves lying awake at night, wondering how they would make ends meet. The comfortable retirement they had planned now seemed like a distant dream. Every ring of the phone brought a new wave of anxiety. Another creditor, another sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful authority figure. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Martha had an idea. "Robert," she said, turning to her husband in the darkness, "we can't be the only ones going through this. There must be others, not just here in Millbrook, but all over. What if we could find them? What if we could work together to figure out what really happened?" Robert sat up, intrigued despite his weariness. "You mean try to track down Barkley ourselves? But Martha, we're not detectives. We're just a couple of old fools who got taken for a ride." Martha's voice grew stronger, more determined. "We may be old, Robert Henderson, but we are far from fools. We've got 50 years of life experience between us. We've raised 3 children, run businesses, taught hundreds of students. If anyone can figure this out, it's us." As the first light of dawn began to seep through their curtains, a plan started to take shape. They would reach out to the other victims in Millbrook, pool their knowledge and resources. Maybe together, they could uncover something the authorities had missed. Little did Robert and Martha know that this decision would be the first step on a journey that would not only change their lives but inspire millions around the country. As they drifted off to sleep, hand in hand, a small spark of hope flickered in their hearts. The golden years they had envisioned might be tarnished, but perhaps they weren't lost entirely. Perhaps, just perhaps, their greatest adventure was yet to come. The Millbrook Community Center had seen its fair share of gatherings over the years: town halls, bake sales, and the occasional heated debate over local ordinances. but never had it hosted a meeting quite like this one. On a Wednesday afternoon, just 2 weeks after the Hendersons' world had come crashing down, the main hall was filled to capacity with grim-faced retirees, all victims of James Barkley's elaborate scam. Robert stood at the front of the room, his hands gripping the podium so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Public speaking had never been his forte. That had always been Martha's domain. But as he looked out at the sea of familiar faces, each etched with worry and defeat, he found his voice. "Friends," he began, his words echoing in the hushed room. "We've all been dealt a terrible blow. Our trust has been betrayed, our futures thrown into uncertainty. But we're not here to wallow in our misfortune. We're here to fight back." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fight back? How could a group of senior citizens hope to take on a sophisticated fraudster who had already outwitted them once? Martha stepped forward, her presence immediately calming the room. "We may not have our savings anymore," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But we haven't lost everything. We have our minds, our experiences, and most importantly, we have each other. Together, we just might be able to uncover the truth and bring James Barkley to justice." As Martha outlined their plan, to pool their collective knowledge, retrace Barkley's steps, and potentially uncover evidence that the authorities might have missed, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. Looks of despair gave way to glimmers of hope, and then to sparks of determination. Ethel Johnson, a retired librarian with a penchant for mystery novels, was the first to speak up. "I've been doing some digging," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Barkley's company, New Horizon Investments, didn't exist before last year. It's a shell, probably one of many." This revelation caused a stir. Harold Wilson, who had worked in banking for 4 decades before retiring, chimed in. "That fits with what I've found. The paperwork he gave us was convincing, but now that I've had time to really look at it, there are inconsistencies. Subtle, but they're there." As more people began to share their observations and insights, a picture started to emerge. Barkley hadn't just appeared in Millbrook out of nowhere. He had methodically built up a network of trust, using community events and local connections to establish his credibility. "He sponsored the little league team my grandson plays on," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice quavering with anger. "Used that to get close to parents and grandparents. Made us think he was one of us." The meeting stretched on for hours, with people breaking into smaller groups to compare notes and brainstorm ideas. Martha moved from group to group, her natural leadership abilities shining through as she encouraged and organized their efforts. By the time the janitor began pointedly checking his watch, the Millbrook Retirees Investigation Team, as they had dubbed themselves with a mix of self-deprecating humor and newfound purpose, had a plan of action. They would create a timeline of Barkley's activities in Millbrook and the surrounding areas. They would reach out to other potential victims in neighboring towns. And they would start digging deeper into Barkley's background, looking for any clues that might lead them to his current whereabouts. As the meeting broke up, Robert noticed a change in the people around him. Backs were a little straighter, eyes a little brighter. They had been knocked down, yes, but they weren't out. Not by a long shot. Walking home arm in arm with Martha, Robert felt a renewed sense of purpose. "You know," he said, squeezing her hand, "when I retired, I thought my days of solving complex problems were over. Guess I was wrong about that." Martha laughed, a sound that warmed Robert's heart. "Oh, darling," she said, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of mischief and determination. "I have a feeling we're about to embark on the most challenging and rewarding project of our lives." As they reached their front porch, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful sight, one that would have normally signaled the end of a day. But for Robert and Martha Henderson, and for the newly formed Millbrook Retirees Investigation Team, it felt like the dawn of something new. Something that would not only change their lives, but potentially touch the lives of countless others who had fallen victim to schemes like Barkley's. Little did they know just how far their investigation would take them, or how their story of resilience and determination would capture the hearts and minds of millions across the nation. As they stepped into their home, ready to start their research, the first threads of an extraordinary tapestry were being woven. A tale of justice, redemption, and the indomitable spirit of those who refuse to be defeated by life's cruelest twists. As autumn gave way to winter, the Millbrook retirees investigation team transformed the Hendersons' cozy living room into a makeshift command center. Maps, timelines, and sticky notes covered every available surface, creating a complex web of information that would have impressed even the most seasoned detectives. Robert, hunched over his old laptop, squinted at the screen through his reading glasses. "Martha, come look at this," he called out, his voice tinged with excitement. "I think I've found something." Martha hurried over, a mug of steaming coffee in each hand. She set one down beside Robert and peered at the screen. "What is it, dear?" "I've been cross-referencing Barclay's activities here with reports from other towns," Robert explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard with newfound dexterity. "There's a pattern. Every place he's hit, he's used a different name, but the method is always the same. He sponsors local events, integrates himself into the community, and then strikes." Martha's eyes widened. "So this isn't just about us. It's bigger than Millbrook." "Much bigger," Robert nodded grimly. "I've identified at least 5 other communities across 3 states that have fallen victim to similar schemes. The names and companies are different, but the MO is identical." Just then, the doorbell rang. Martha went to answer it, returning moments later with Ethel Johnson and Harold Wilson in tow, both looking flushed with excitement despite the chill outside. "You won't believe what we've uncovered," Ethel burst out, unwinding her scarf. "We've been digging into Barclay's past, and we think we've found his real identity." The next hour was a flurry of activity as the 4 retirees pooled their discoveries. Harold, using his banking contacts, had managed to trace some of the money trail, revealing a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Ethel, meanwhile, had employed her librarian's research skills to uncover a series of news articles dating back nearly 2 decades. "His real name is likely Michael Farnsworth," Ethel explained, spreading out printouts on the coffee table. "He's been pulling these kinds of scams for years, always staying one step ahead of the law. But he's slipped up this time. He's gotten greedy, hit too many places too close together." As they pored over the evidence, a sense of cautious optimism began to fill the room. They were onto something big, something that could potentially bring down not just the man who had swindled them, but an entire network of fraudsters preying on vulnerable retirees across the country. But with this realization came a sobering thought. Robert voiced what they were all thinking. "This is bigger than us now. We need to take this to the authorities." Martha nodded slowly. "But will they listen? We're just a bunch of old folks from a small town. What if they dismiss us?" Harold leaned forward, a glint of determination in his eyes. "Then we make them listen. We've got evidence, connections, and most importantly, we've got the truth on our side. It's time to take this fight to the next level." As the team began to formulate their plan to approach the FBI, none of them could have anticipated the chain of events they were about to set in motion. Their amateur investigation was about to catapult them into the national spotlight, turning their personal quest for justice into a movement that would inspire millions. The Indianapolis FBI field office was a hive of activity on a cold January morning. Special Agent Samantha Reeves sat at her desk, sifting through a mountain of paperwork, when her phone buzzed. It was the receptionist from downstairs. "Agent Reeves, there's a group of senior citizens here insisting on speaking with you. They say it's about a major fraud case." Samantha sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. It wasn't uncommon for people to show up claiming to have cracked some big case. Usually it amounted to nothing, but something in the receptionist's tone made her pause. "Send them up," she said after a moment's hesitation. 15 minutes later, Samantha found herself facing Robert, Martha, Ethel, and Harold. Her initial skepticism quickly gave way to astonishment as they laid out their findings. The meticulous research, the connecting of dots across state lines, the uncovering of the true identity behind the scam. It was impressive detective work by any standard, let alone from a group of retirees from a small town. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," Samantha said, leaning forward, her voice filled with a mix of admiration and concern. "Do you realize what you've uncovered here? This isn't just about one man or one scam. You've potentially exposed a nationwide network of elder fraud. Robert nodded solemnly. We know, Agent Reeves. That's why we're here. We want to help bring these criminals to justice. Not just for us, but for everyone they've hurt. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. The FBI launched a full-scale investigation, with the Millbrook team providing crucial insights and connections. As news of the case spread, more victims came forward from across the country, each with a piece of the puzzle. The story caught the attention of the national media. At first, it was just a small mention on local news, but soon, major networks were running features on the retiree detectives of Millbrook. Interviews requests flooded in, and suddenly, Robert and Martha found themselves thrust into the spotlight. It's surreal, Martha confessed during a primetime interview. We never set out to be heroes or celebrities. We just wanted our life savings back and to prevent others from suffering the same fate. As the investigation progressed, the ripple effect of their actions became apparent. Financial regulatory bodies began to re-examine their protocols for detecting and preventing elder fraud. Community centers across the country started hosting financial literacy workshops for seniors. Young people, inspired by the tenacity and sharp minds of the Millbrook team, began volunteering to help elderly neighbors manage their finances. But with the increased attention came new challenges. Not everyone was happy about the spotlight being shown on the world of financial fraud. The Hendersons and their team began receiving threatening letters and suspicious phone calls. They're trying to scare us off, Robert told Martha one night, his voice low to avoid alarming their round-the-clock FBI protection detail. But we've come too far to back down now. Martha squeezed his hand. We knew this wouldn't be easy, dear, but we're not alone in this fight anymore. We've got each other, we've got our team, and now we've got an entire nation watching our backs. As winter thawed into spring, the investigation reached a critical point. The FBI, armed with the evidence gathered by the Millbrook team and corroborated by victims across the nation, was closing in on Michael Farnsworth and his network. The Hendersons and their team huddled around the television, hearts pounding as they watched the breaking news. FBI agents were raiding offices in multiple cities, led by none other than Agent Samantha Reeves. As handcuffed figures were led out of gleaming office buildings, Robert turned to Martha, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. We did it, he whispered. We actually did it. But even as they celebrated this victory, both Robert and Martha knew that their journey was far from over. The arrest was just the beginning. There would be trials, testimonies, and a long road to recovering what was lost. More importantly, there was work to be done to ensure that what happened to them would never happen to anyone else again. As the news anchor's voice faded into the background, Martha looked at the faces of her friends, her partners in this unexpected adventure. She saw in their eyes the same mix of relief, pride, and determination that she felt in her heart. You know, she said, a smile playing on her lips, I have a feeling our golden years are going to be a lot more exciting than we ever imagined. Little did they know just how prophetic those words would prove to be. The Millbrook retirees investigation team was about to embark on a new chapter of their lives, one that would take them from small-town heroes to national advocates, forever changing the landscape of elder financial security in America. The federal courthouse in Chicago buzzed with anticipation. Reporters jostled for position outside, their cameras trained on the entrance. Inside, Robert and Martha Henderson sat in the witness box, their hands clasped tightly together. The trial of Michael Farnsworth, aka James Barkley, had become one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in recent memory. As Robert recounted their story to the jury, his voice steady and clear, Martha couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. Just months ago, they had been devastated victims. Now, they were key witnesses in a landmark case against elder fraud. Mr. Henderson, the prosecutor asked, can you tell the court what motivated you and your wife to pursue this investigation, even after losing your life savings? Robert leaned forward, his eyes sweeping across the courtroom. It wasn't just about getting our money back, he said. It was about making sure this didn't happen to anyone else. We may be retired, but we're not useless. We have a lifetime of experience, and we decided to put it to good use. The trial lasted for weeks, with testimony from victims across the country. The Millbrook team's meticulous research proved crucial in connecting the dots of Farnsworth's extensive fraud network. When the guilty verdict was finally read, a collective sigh of relief echoed through the courtroom. But for Robert and Martha, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a new chapter. As they stepped out of the courthouse, they were greeted by a sea of cameras and microphones. Among the crowd, they spotted familiar faces, other seniors who had been inspired by their story to speak out about their own experiences with fraud. "Mrs. Henderson," a young reporter called out, "what's next for you and your husband?" Martha exchanged a glance with Robert before answering. "We've learned so much through this ordeal," she said, "and we've realized that there's a real need for education and advocacy when it comes to protecting seniors from financial exploitation. So we're not stopping here." In the months that followed, the Hendersons found themselves traveling across the country, sharing their story and the lessons they had learned. They spoke at community centers, retirement homes, and even congressional hearings. Their message was clear: age is not a weakness, but a strength. With the right knowledge and support, seniors could be their own best defenders against fraud. Back in Millbrook, Ethel and Harold had turned the community center into a hub for financial literacy workshops. They partnered with local banks and law enforcement to create programs specifically tailored for seniors. The initiative was so successful that other towns began to replicate their model. One crisp autumn evening, almost exactly a year after their world had been turned upside down, the Hendersons sat on their porch, reflecting on the whirlwind their lives had become. "You know, Martha," Robert said, his eyes twinkling, "when I pictured our retirement, I never imagined we'd be busier than when we were working." Martha laughed, a sound that still warmed Robert's heart after all these years. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? But I wouldn't change a thing." Just then, Robert's phone buzzed with a news alert. He read it, his eyes widening. "Martha, you won't believe this. Congress is introducing a new bill aimed at strengthening protections against elder fraud. They're calling it the Millbrook Act." Martha gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Robert, we really are making a difference, aren't we?" As they sat there, hand in hand, watching the sun set over their beloved town, they felt a profound sense of purpose. They had turned their personal tragedy into a triumph not just for themselves, but for seniors across the nation. Little did they know that their journey was far from over. The spotlight on elder fraud had opened up a Pandora's box of related issues affecting seniors, from healthcare scams to tech-based fraud. The Millbrook team was about to face their biggest challenge yet, one that would test their resolve, their ingenuity, and the strength of the movement they had inadvertently started. The Millbrook Community Center was packed to the brim, a sea of silver hair punctuated by the occasional younger face. On the stage, Robert Henderson stood before a large screen, clicker in hand, looking slightly out of his element. "Now, I know many of us didn't grow up with computers," he began, eliciting a few chuckles from the audience. "But in today's world, understanding technology is crucial to protecting ourselves from fraud." As Robert clicked through his presentation on cybersecurity for seniors, Martha couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Just a year ago, her husband had barely known how to send an email. Now, here he was, teaching others about phishing scams and secure passwords. The workshop was the latest in a series of initiatives launched by the Millbrook team. As their advocacy work had gained national attention, they'd realized that financial fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Seniors were increasingly becoming targets of sophisticated online scams, and many felt ill-equipped to protect themselves in the digital age. After the presentation, as attendees mingled over coffee and cookies, a young woman approached Martha. She introduced herself as Emily Chun, a graduate student in computer science at the nearby university. "Mrs. Henderson, I was really impressed by your team's work," Emily said enthusiastically. "I've been developing an app to help seniors detect online scams, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in collaborating?" Martha's eyes lit up. "That sounds fascinating, dear. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow and tell us more about it?" The next evening, As Emily explained her project to the Millbrook team gathered in the Hendersons' living room, a new possibility began to take shape. By combining Emily's technical expertise with the team's real-world experience and connections, they could create something truly groundbreaking, a comprehensive digital safety net for seniors. Over the following months, the Millbrook team threw themselves into this new project with gusto. Harold's financial acumen, Ethel's research skills, and Robert and Martha's newfound tech savvy all came into play. They worked tirelessly with Emily and her university colleagues, testing prototypes and gathering feedback from seniors across the country. The result was Senior Shield, a user-friendly app that could detect potential scams in emails, texts, and websites. It also included educational modules and a direct line to report suspicious activity to authorities. The launch of Senior Shield marked a new phase in the Millbrook team's journey. Suddenly, they found themselves at the intersection of technology and elder advocacy, a position none of them could have imagined just 2 years earlier. As news of the app spread, so did its impact. Stories poured in from across the country of seniors who had avoided scams thanks to Senior Shield. The app was featured on national news, and downloads soared. But with success came new challenges. Tech companies, seeing the potential market, began developing their own competing products. Some were genuinely helpful, but others seemed more interested in profiting from seniors' fears than in actually protecting them. One evening, as the team gathered for their weekly meeting, Robert broached a difficult subject. "Folks, I think we need to consider taking Senior Shield to the next level. We're doing good work, but to really make a difference, we need to think bigger." Martha nodded, understanding where her husband was going. "You're talking about turning this into a real company, aren't you?" "I am," Robert confirmed. "It's a big step, and it would mean a lot of changes. But I think it's necessary if we want to ensure that what we've built continues to help people and doesn't get overshadowed by less scrupulous operations." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. They had started this journey seeking justice for themselves and their community. Now, they were contemplating entering the corporate world, a realm that had once betrayed their trust so profoundly. Ethel was the first to speak up. "It's scary, no doubt about it. But if we don't do it, who will? We've come this far by facing our fears. I say we take the leap." One by one, the others voiced their agreement. As the meeting wrapped up, there was a palpable sense of both excitement and apprehension in the air. They were about to embark on yet another new chapter in their unexpected journey. As Martha walked their friends to the door, she caught Robert staring out the window, a pensive look on his face. "Penny for your thoughts, dear?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. Robert turned to her, a mix of determination and wonder in his eyes. "You know, Martha, when we lost our savings, I thought our golden years were over. But now I think they're just beginning." Martha leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the first stars appear in the twilight sky. "I think you're right, Robert. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together, just like we always have." As they stood there, this extraordinary couple from a small Midwestern town, they couldn't have imagined the challenges and triumphs that still lay ahead. Their journey from victims to advocates had already inspired millions. But their transformation into tech entrepreneurs would test their resolve like never before, and ultimately redefine what it means to age in the digital era. The sleek conference room of Henderson Senior Solutions, nestled in a modest office building on the outskirts of Millbrook, was a far cry from the living room where the team had started their journey. Robert sat at the head of the table, his reflection barely recognizable in the polished surface. Around him sat Martha, Ethel, Harold, and a handful of new faces, young, tech-savvy individuals who had joined their growing enterprise. "The latest numbers are in," Emily Chun, now their Chief Technology Officer, announced. "Senior Shield has surpassed 5 million downloads. We're making a real difference." A round of applause filled the room, but Robert's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The transition from grassroots advocates to corporate leaders had been more challenging than any of them had anticipated. Success had brought its own set of complications. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that the team was at a crossroads. An offer had come in from a major tech conglomerate. They wanted to buy Senior Shield for a staggering sum. It would give us the resources to expand our reach exponentially, Harold argued, his banker's instincts kicking in. Think of how many more seniors we could help. Ethel shook her head vehemently. But at what cost? We started this to protect seniors, not to sell out to the highest bidder. How can we be sure they'll maintain our vision? The debate raged on, with valid points on both sides. As Robert listened, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision on his shoulders. They had come so far, touched so many lives, but had they lost sight of their original purpose along the way? After the meeting, Robert and Martha took a long walk through the streets of Millbrook. The town had changed in subtle ways since their story had gained national attention. There was a new vitality in the air, with younger families moving in, attracted by the town's newfound reputation as a hub of innovation in elder care. We set out to make a difference, Martha, Robert said, his voice heavy with contemplation. But now I'm worried we're becoming the very thing we fought against. A big corporation more concerned with the bottom line than with the people we're supposed to be helping. Martha squeezed his hand. I know what you mean, but we're not there yet, Robert. We still have a choice. As they rounded the corner, they came across Mrs. Abernathy, one of the original victims of the Barclay scam. She was chatting animatedly with a group of teenagers, showing them something on her smartphone. Robert, Martha, she called out, waving them over. I was just showing these young folks how I used Senior Shield to avoid a phishing scam yesterday. Can you believe it? Me, outsmarting those internet crooks. The pride in Mrs. Abernathy's voice was unmistakable. As they chatted with her and the teens, Robert felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. This was why they had started this journey, not for profit or recognition, but to empower seniors like Mrs. Abernathy. That night, as Robert and Martha lay in bed, both lost in thought, Martha broke the silence. You know, dear, maybe we're looking at this all wrong. We don't have to choose between staying small and true to our roots or selling out to a big corporation. What if there's a third option? Robert propped himself up on one elbow, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Martha's eyes sparkled with excitement. What if we turn Henderson Senior Solutions into a nonprofit? We could reinvest all the profits into research and development, expand our educational programs, and maybe even start a foundation to help seniors who've been victims of fraud. As Martha outlined her vision, Robert felt a familiar spark ignite within him. It was the same feeling he'd had when they first decided to fight back against Barclay, when they launched their nationwide advocacy campaign, and when they created Senior Shield. The next morning, Robert called an emergency board meeting. As he presented Martha's idea to the team, he could see the same spark of excitement light up in their eyes. It won't be easy, he concluded. We'll be turning down a lot of money, and we'll have to work harder than ever. But I believe this is the right path for us. It's true to who we are and why we started this journey in the first place. One by one, the team voiced their agreement. Even Harold, who had been the strongest advocate for selling, nodded his approval. It's not the conventional choice, he said with a chuckle. But then again, when have we ever done things the conventional way? As the meeting adjourned, there was a palpable sense of renewed purpose in the air. They had faced a major test and emerged stronger, more united in their mission than ever before. Outside the office, Robert and Martha paused for a moment, looking out over their beloved town. You know, Martha, Robert said, a hint of wonder in his voice, I think we've stumbled upon the true meaning of our golden years. It's not about rest and relaxation. It's about using our experience, our wisdom, to make the world a little bit better. Martha leaned her head on his shoulder, a contented smile on her face. I couldn't agree more, dear. And the best part? We're just getting started. As they walked hand in hand back into the office, ready to embark on this new chapter, neither Robert nor Martha could have imagined the global impact their decision would have. Their story of resilience, reinvention, and unwavering commitment to helping others was about to inspire a whole new generation of senior advocates around the world. 5 years had passed since the fateful decision to turn Henderson Senior Solutions into a nonprofit organization. The sun was setting over Millbrook, casting a warm golden glow over the town square where a crowd had gathered for a very special occasion. Robert and Martha Henderson stood on a small stage, surrounded by friends, family, and supporters from across the country. Behind them, a large screen displayed live video feeds from similar gatherings in cities around the world. Today, Robert began, his voice strong despite his 80 years. We're not just celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Henderson Foundation for Senior Empowerment. We're celebrating a movement that has grown beyond anything we could have imagined. The crowd cheered as Robert recounted the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the devastating loss of their retirement savings to the creation of Senior Shield, and finally to the establishment of their global foundation. Martha stepped forward, her eyes glistening with emotion. What started as a small team of retirees in Millbrook has blossomed into an international network of senior advocates. Today, we have chapters in over 50 countries, all dedicated to protecting and empowering seniors in the digital age. On the screen behind them, images flashed of Senior Shield workshops in Tokyo, technology clinics for seniors in Nairobi, and intergenerational coding classes in Rio de Janeiro. The Henderson Foundation had become a beacon of hope and innovation in elder care and empowerment around the world. As Robert and Martha shared stories of lives touched and communities transformed, there wasn't a dry eye in the square. They spoke of seniors who had not only avoided scams but had gone on to start their own businesses, of retirees who had found new purpose as mentors and advocates, and of a shifting global perception of what it means to grow older in the 21st century. But our work is far from over, Robert said, his voice taking on a tone of determination. As technology continues to advance, so too must our efforts to ensure that seniors are not left behind or taken advantage of. He went on to announce the Foundation's most ambitious project yet, a global initiative to make digital literacy a fundamental right for seniors everywhere. The plan involved partnerships with governments, tech companies, and educational institutions around the world. As the ceremony drew to a close, a surprise video message began to play on the screen. It was from the President of the United States, announcing a new federal program inspired by the Henderson Foundation's work. The Millbrook model, as it had come to be known, was to be implemented nationwide. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Robert and Martha stood hand in hand, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what their simple act of standing up against injustice had led to. As the formal proceedings ended and people began to mingle, Robert and Martha found a quiet moment to themselves at the edge of the square. They watched as young children showed their grandparents how to use the latest version of Senior Shield, as teenagers engaged in animated discussions with retirees about artificial intelligence ethics, and as old friends from their original Millbrook team shared laughs and memories. "You know, Martha," Robert said, his voice soft with wonder, "when we lost our savings all those years ago, I thought our golden years had been stolen from us. I never could have imagined that they were actually just beginning." Martha squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with love and pride. "We may not have taken that trip to Europe we originally planned, but oh, what an adventure we've had." As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Robert and Martha Henderson looked out over the gathering, a living testament to the power of resilience, the strength of community, and the enduring spirit of those who refuse to be defined by their age. Their journey had been unexpected, challenging, and at times, overwhelming. But as they stood there, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the love of their global family, they knew that they had found something far more valuable than any retirement savings could have provided. They had found purpose. They had created a legacy. And in doing so, they had redefined what it truly means to have golden years. As night fell and stars began to twinkle overhead, Robert and Martha made their way home, arm in arm, ready for whatever new adventures tomorrow might bring. For they had learned that life's greatest chapters can begin at any age. All it takes is the courage to turn the page. Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.